money to bring them here, then, whereas you go to the school sometimes, what's going on. So that's worked out well, and there's been, I'm sure, a few thousand students through here. It was probably, I saw one group of 200 came here while I was in Atlanta a few weeks ago. It's like, wow. So they come. Took a while though to get it going because you'd be surprised how disinterested a lot of the staff is in African history. Unfortunately, a lot of times they just like, why do we want to go there? Okay, so that's why we're doing it. Yeah. So their children will all have interest. So that's how it started. And then I had 8 different artists. I was just telling the brother on the phone, that were involved. So there's 92 pictures, and that's pretty much how it got going. So what I do here, and I'll kind of put a little bit in context of the students, because they're my main customers, so I'll tell you a little who they are, and that'll give you an idea of what I want the students to know. So we started here on the left side with Apoka Kanyani. This is a woman from northern Ghana, Bolgatenga area. My wife is from Bolgatenga. And she was basically known for having used her pestle to kill one of the head of a little slaver patrol that came into their village of Bukere. And she was able to kill him with that. And the word got back out that, this was an inhospitable place to live for slaves. So she kind of became a legend in her area. They call it the pestle turned to blood. And my children, they all do this presentation, and then they do it all in the language so you can get the me. I'll just hang with what I can do. Okay, now Queen T of ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet. This is where I introduced the children to the reality that ancient Egypt was a black civilization. I think a lot of us have learned that over the last 20 years or so. And so she was in the 18th dynasty, the wife of Amenhotep III, mother of Akhenaten, and probably the aunt of King Tut. So, very powerful queen, and I like the children here to know because see they get all of this literature, kind of like we did, but it's worse here. With all of these white pharaohs and everybody's white. There's a white Jew pulling these big stones and all of that stuff. So these are African people. Wasn't no white Arabs or nobody even in the area during the time. So we don't even have to guess. They wasn't even there. And so that's how I start with Queen T. Then of course I got Garvey here in the middle because I'm basically a Garveyite. You were asking me a little bit about how I got here or what my orientation was, which basically I always felt that we had to build something of consequence on the African continent. We're going to have consequence anywhere. Garvey said a strong man is strong everywhere. If you're in the U.S. in these places and you're realistic about it, you know that that's not coming. So Garvey, United Negro Improvement Association, had over 6 million members from around the world. You read philosophies and opinions, you really get an idea of how visionary and brilliant the man was. Kwame Nkrumah, students will know Nkrumah because he's the father of the nation after colonialism and all of that. But I have this quote up here really more for the teachers as much as the students, because sometimes the children are 2 and 3 and 5 years old. And this is where Nkrumah is saying, look, I read Marx, Hegel, all of the big brain Europeans, but the one that did the most for me was the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey. Wow. So here in Ghana they have the Black Star line. Well, that came from Garvey. Black Star, all of that, Black Star football team, all of these concepts, a lot of them Nkrumah just lifted from Garvey. Wow. And so once they know that, they can put Garvey in a little better context, for why he's on the wall and why he's central. We're here in a new Ningo, which they also used to call Kabu Kope, and the founder was Jonas Kabu, who's the first one out here, and then he brought the chief from Ningo here to New Ningo, and so now they have New Ningo where we are and Old Ningo. So this is just making sure I give some respect to the John being the first chief, and his son, grandson or something is the chief now. Leazarde, that's in the Gruni or Frafra language, that's the same as Akwaba, Wezo. And I've got got the Ghana flag, Ethiopia flag, Jamaica flag, and red, black, and green. Just kind of representing some of the cardinal points. I'm thinking of changing the two in the middle, because I've been using, I might use the Haitian flag, for that side, and then maybe a different African country. But right now, Ethiopia's there because they've never been colonized, so they kind of represent. I've been gone 2 months, these weren't here. Now they're here. That's how fast. Yeah. What is that? What do you call this? Is that a loner? Is this a loner? What is this?
This is an interesting plant.
Yeah, this one has all kind of medicinal
The
stuff.
leaves,
For para
here,
also.
it's a medicine. You can, if you have a swollen teeth,
Yeah.
this one
Really?
in your shoe. Shrinks. Put it in your shoe for the
Blood
whole
pressure.
day. Wear it. If you want to sleep with it, and you be.
No, I know they're very powerful.
The noni plant is
And they,
there.
and they
It's
do.
different.
And this also, they just say cancer, it does something, some effect. So a lot of people who know herbs live a long time here.
Yeah, this one, they treat diabetes.
Huh?
This one's, they treat diabetes as well.
Ah, okay. Yeah, you see, you're walking around Ghana, you're walking around a pharmacy and you don't
Yeah.
even know it. Okay, then this is where I usually get in the most trouble because of the deep conditioning of the teachers more than the children, of course. Because they've all had this white Eve, this white Adam, all of this stuff. I say Eve, I'm talking about what we know we can prove in terms of DNA. The parents of humanity there in East Africa some 200,000 years ago. That's our species, which is Homo sapiens sapiens, which is the same whether you're an Alaskan or Russian or Indian or whatever, Chinese. But the interesting thing here is they left Africa around 70,000 BC, roughly, which means 130,000 or so years, there was no people on Earth who were not on the African continent. So for the 2/3 of human history, everybody who is our species was on the African continent. 70,000 years ago, that we've gone out and populated the world. Meanwhile, of course, we're in Africa, changing and changing. So sometimes people say, how do we have all of these languages and all of this variety? And I say, well, we've been here longer than everybody else. I mean, everybody came from us, but I'm talking to black folk. Now, as they moved on, environmental conditions changed their skin color, and melanin, vitamin D deficiency, all of these different things played into, all the variety we have. But that's the start. So I like the children to understand that they're part of that, first branch of the human family. Okay, Chinua Achebe, he's a great writer. A lot of people have read Things Fall Apart, Anthills of the Savannah. He's an Igbo man out of Nigeria. I just like what I really like is he gives you this kind of feeling about what it must have been like, say, prior to the colonial, life, and then how we changed during that life, and then how we have all these pathologies in the post-colonial, neo-colonial period. So he's a very brilliant writer. Asa Hilliard, when I was about 19 in school, he came and gave a presentation called Free Your Mind, Return to the Source. I was already kind of Black Panther, Black activist type child, but that gave me the African perspective, the African center, talking about the ancient civilizations and all of that. And he's a psychologist, historian, Egyptologist, and just all-around good brother. He was also installed here in Ghana in the central region. Ya Santawa, you probably heard about her in the Shanti region, Queen Mother Vijisu. She's known, of course, for rallying the folks to fight the British during the colonial period. They finally, of course, captured her and sent her to an exile, I guess to Seychelles, probably. They sent them different places. I think they sent her and even the first Prempe, they were all there in Seychelles. But anyway, she represents that resistance. And sometimes when we have time, there's a real famous quotation that she does where she's imploring her men to come out and fight and this kind of thing. And it's well known here in Ghana. In Ghana, a lot of people know the name Kimathi because that's what Jerry Rawlings named his son, Kimathi Rawlings. A lot of people don't know he was naming him after this gentleman here. This is when the British, of course, came into Kenya. These Africans had to rally to try to get their land back and get the British out. They call them the Mau Mau. That's what the British call them. When we were growing up, we used to hear that, oh, Mau Mau, Mau Mau. But they were really the Kikuyu Land Freedom Army. And he sacrificed. This picture was drawn after he was captured. If you can see the whole thing, he's roped down and cuffed down and everything. But he's defiant to the end. That's the great Dida Nkemata. In Zinga, you're probably hearing some people naming their daughters here and there in Zinga. She was a warrior out of Angola. We're going back about 500 years. She's basically fought the Portuguese more or less her whole life, all the way until the end. Just trying to curb the slave trade, and of course just maintain some sovereignty for her people. So there's a lot of little stories about her and little anecdotes about things that she did in terms of demonstrating her power and commanding respect from the Portuguese. Ajete, Cornelius Ajete, the West African regional troops had gone to fight in World War II on the side of the British and the Americans or what have you. They really performed well and established themselves in Burma. In fact, they even have a place here called Burma Camp. So in Burma, they were struggling, mainly running the Japanese off the island. And so after all of this fighting and struggling that these West African regiments did, when they came back, kind of like when we got back to the U.S., all of the good things that were supposed to happen for us didn't happen. So all of the retirements and all of the goodies that were supposed to come, the British said, we changed our mind. So he and a couple of other veterans marched on Christiansburg, which was the British colonial capital in Accra, and they were shot down by this Major Imre, who was a British major. When they shot and killed them, the people came out, and that's really what started the Accra riots. And from the Accra riots, that's when they started jailing people, jailing Nkrumah. You hear about the Big Six and all of that. That was really the beginning of the end of the colonial grip on Ghana, when the people came out and made life unlivable for the colonial regime. And he was the leader, the senior of the three. The Jete, Lamte, and Tipo. Maurice Bishop of Grenada, some of y'all remember Ronald Reagan went down there and bombed the place in the smithereens. But they forget to tell us there's only 100,000 people in the country. So, they could fit in the Rose Bowl, so they couldn't have been that big a threat to America. But they weren't a threat to America. Where they were a threat is Maurice Bishop had brought their literacy up to almost 100%. He was working diligently and making a lot of progress for self-sufficiency in terms of their own food, import substitution. He was putting in an airstrip for tourism, but that's the pretext that the U.S. used to say, they're putting some infrastructure in so the Russians can come into the hemisphere, which is all nonsense. But the point is, this is the thing about power. You have power and the other people don't. Any pretext will do. So they went down, and of course he was killed right at that time, and then they bombed, just killed that whole revolution that they had going on.
I was at Edwards at that time.
Yeah, in '83.
Yeah.
But that's Maurice Bishop. He did what he could at the time. Nomaton Amazon warriors these are in Benin, which is Dahomey. I hear they're making some movie with this Viola Davis, who I never had heard of until I was just back there. But I guess she's popular, and they're calling it the Woman King. Have you seen that? I saw some little clip in there that was very disturbing, but anyway, we won't go on that. But anyhow, this is the Nomaton, the Amazon, what the French call them the Amazon after the famous Amazons and, I guess Greek mythology or what have you. But they were a fighting force, mainly for our purposes, against the French who were colonizing the place. And so Nomaton actually in their language means our mothers. So now they also say the women who were in Black Panther were also supposedly modeled after them. Okay, next we have Edward Wilmot Blyden from the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, and basically he's really one of the true fathers of Pan-Africanism, writing Africa for the Africans, all these kind of things. His great work is Islam, Christianity, Islam, and the Negro race. Basically, he ended up moving to Liberia and becoming a a very well-known diplomat, even ran for president, founded their main college they have there, and just all around brilliant inspiration for people like John Henry Clark and the other ones. So this was kind of Pan-Africanism even before Garvey. Steve Biko, I have the children here, and it never fails. I ask them to raise their hand if they've heard of apartheid, and not a single hand ever goes up, except for one school, several hands went up, and I knew that. So you guys are on top of it, but for most schools, they don't know what apartheid is. I asked the teachers how many of them know, and they start looking at the ground. Now, a handful of them will know, like the older ones. But you know, how can you be, now if I ask them, you know, what was Queen Elizabeth's granddaughter's shoe size in 1821, they can tell me.
Wow.
But what is apartheid?
Wow.
You know, as though that's not relevant. You know, so I have to even,
Wow.
so instead of talking about Biko, here's where I even have to explain apartheid to the children. I use this opportunity and then just basically say a few things about Biko being a, you know, anti-apartheid activist and writer, and starting the South African student organization, Black consciousness movement, all the rest of that.
So that's when earlier you were talking about still the colonialism.
Oh yeah, I mean it's you know, it's really deep. And so when we're talking about how we're going to get out of this situation, you know, because that's why people come from the diaspora, African Americans, and they look and they say, well, you know, people don't know about colonialism. You know, they like quote unquote, at least we know about these things. I mean, apartheid. At least we know, but you know, knowing there doesn't have as much leverage as knowing here. If you're here in Africa with the land resources, population, what you know can make a difference. You can kind of know it over there, but you know, the guy said, but you ain't getting up off that porch, you know. Anyway, Steve Biko. So Sonny Ali, this is where I introduced him as the great West African. I don't mean to be, I mean, I was in the U.S. a long time. There's a lot we can do. We can talk about that later, but I'm just saying one thing that I think is a fool's errand is trying to change the minds of the hostile majority. I think that one is not going far. Okay, Sonny Ali is where I try to introduce him to the West African empire, Donna, Mali, Songhai being the last and the largest empire. Sonny Ali, who was you know, is ostensibly a Muslim, but he was really an African traditionalist. That's why you'll see a lot of the Arabs kind of disparage him a little bit because they didn't feel like he was true. But what do we care? We were doing this a long time before Islam. So his empire, he had like 14 major provinces. He had like 500 ships on the Niger River. I mean, he's really well organized and really well established. This is just so the children remember, even here in West Africa, we had coherent empires that worked. So this idea that we can't run a nation and we can't run it, this is just a new thing. I mean, we've always known we could and we have. But Hans and I just mentioned struggling against the French. They call him the Great Shark. And I was mentioning about the warriors being some of his front troops, the sisters there. Since I've established what apartheid is, I can tell them about Mary Makeba, who was actually kicked out of her country for 30 years because of her singing of anti-apartheid or just singing about justice and politics and reality. So she's, you know, y'all might remember Stokely Carmichael, who was Kwame Ture. She was married to him for some time when they lived in Guinea.
Wow.
Pata Pata and all these others. But she's very active. So they kept her out of the country, you know, for 30 years. But, you know, she raised money, raised awareness, and did a lot of things, so she's there. The great Sheikh Anta Diop, more than anyone else, I think he's the one who established the Black Africanness of ancient Kemet or ancient Egypt. 1974, he and Theophile Obenga at the UNESCO conference in Cairo basically brought all the Egyptologists together, from China, America, and everywhere else, and say that the subject is the peopling of Egypt. Everyone of ancient Egypt, everyone bring your data, bring your stuff. And it turns out, of course, that all of these Egyptologists for all of these years have been getting away with murder, you know, because, and so when he and Obenga brought in all the evidence, it was archaeological, it was you know, historical, it was even biblical and all the rest, you know, it just became obviously clear. So in the if you read the proceedings of that event, you'll see that they had to say, look, in reality, Obenga and Sheikh Anta Diop were so much more prepared than everyone else. And no one could disprove what they were saying because it's never been true, but they've never been challenged on it. So they just keep marching up, giving us Charlton Heston, and then we just say, okay. But we put that to bed, so we don't argue with them about that anymore. We just try to make sure our people know. And that's it. J.J. Dessalines, the Haitian Revolution, which is one of the great, the only slave revolt that ended in the slaves having taken over the nation anywhere in history, as far as I've been able to find. And so that's a big thing in of itself. He was kind of the deputy to Toussaint Louverture, which a lot of people have heard of. But of course, after Toussaint was captured and all, Dessalines is really the one that took over and pushed it toward nationhood. Also, the place, the French call it Saint-Domingue. But when he took it over, he turned the name back to Haiti, or Haiti, which was what the natives, Arawak people, or the native Taino kind of people, called their place Haiti. So he had the respect to give the people their name back, knowing that even though we're Africans, we are still, here at Europe. But unfortunately, most of them have been eliminated by then, you can imagine. A lot of these people came from the Benin, Togo, Benin side. So you have a lot of Ewe, Fon, Be speaking people who were the leaders of the Haitian Revolution. Yeah. So the whole voodoo system there, it all came from Benin, Togo, Ewe, local region. It's all the same. George Washington Carver, of course, the agricultural genius of the day. Sometimes I think people don't realize that there was really no one his peer during his time. If you ever gone to Tuskegee and go through that museum, you get a real awakening into what all this brother did. But I like the children here, especially when we talk about agriculture in terms of crop rotation and what he's able to do with soybeans, sweet potato, peanuts, all of the rest of it. The man was just beyond brilliant. There was one thing where they all were together asking him, these big brain people from Iowa and all, say, well, how is it that you know so much about these plants? What they're going to do. How do you how do you know? I mean, we're researching and all this case. And he said, well, I asked them. The plants. He said, well, I asked them. And that was the end of the conversation, because he was like, well, we ain't on that vibe yet. So let's just get back to academia. But he was raised with them almost like family. So they were second nature. Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, one of our great, one of our most confident, balanced, long-term leaders. I think it was the humanity of the man who did not get himself assassinated at the time. Provided material, military support to all of the front lines. He tried to establish something. We talk about Kwanzaa, these principles of which creativity and group economics, establish all these small, independent communes, type of finance and try to build a kind of nation that felt reasonable. I think better than most people, while sustaining and revolutionary. From my move, Becky, from the local region, I got hit from my move. When I first got here, I read a book called From My Move, The African. And that's when I realized, even with all of the pressure coming from the European, British, and culture in terms of their music and their clothes and this, he was one that just stood up and said, you know what, we're going to maintain our culture, our music, our clothes, our dress, everything. We don't care what they say. And he did his best. We still have children saying, kind of anthems here around it. I just like the fact that he wouldn't have been cultural imperialism. Harriet Tubman, of course, we know Harriet Tubman, but a lot of the children here don't have any understanding of what slavery was in the U.S. I always tell people that one time I was talking about Harriet Tubman, the Underground Railroad, and how she was gathering Africans to escape the plantation. And I was saying that we'd worked as slaves for free for centuries, all our lives. Anyway, I got thought you said you weren't paid. I said, no, we were paid. And she said it's back to the McDonald's. And it was, it dawned on me that they think we've been over there getting checks every Friday for the last 400 years. You know what I mean? I said, no wonder you think we got all this money. That's a lot of arrears. No, we were paid. This is slavery. Till you die. So anyway, we got Summer and Michelle. We can go a little faster. I know the sun will get you, but we got some. Well, if you want to speed up, let me know. Summer and Michelle from Mozambique. He's one of our really great young African freedom fighters. In this case, against the Portuguese with Frelimo. Unfortunately, he was killed in a plane accident. We were almost sure orchestrated by the South African Defense Forces. But anyway, his wife actually later on was the one ended up marrying Nelson Mandela after they gave a boot to Winnie. We'll talk about that later. Nanny of Jamaica. A lot of Jamaicans here in Ghana say, hey, Ghana really feels a lot like Jamaica, especially when they live in the mountains. A lot of Jamaicans come here, they move to the mountains. So Nanny, they think it was Nana. She was born in Ghana and then went to Jamaica as a child, enslaved there. And she was one of the Maroons who escaped the plantations, went into the mountains, established their own community. Her Maroon community became so strong that the British basically said, okay, in exchange for you stop raiding us, taking slaves, killing Europeans and everything you've been doing, we're going to give you this whole area over here. Now, they still kept raiding and bringing people, but they had Nanny District. I think it's even still there. Now it's something small, but it was a large swath back at the time. So they have other people, Chermatane, Tampong, all of these names are still in Jamaica. A lot of them coming directly from Ghana, especially in that time. Haile Selassie, Rastafari, of course, one of the, I explained to the children because they've all heard Rastafari, that his name was actually, when he was born, is Liege Tafari Makonnen. And in that tradition, as you get, if you're in royalty, you start getting older, they'll call you Ras, kind of like Prince. So it's Ras Tafari Makonnen, which is where they get Rastafari. So of course we know he struggled against the Italians, not so successfully, but he did everything he could to hold the empire together. And like I said, he was one of the founding fathers of modern-day Pan-Africanism. Of course, Jamaicans see him as somewhat of a holy figure. Bianchi, 25th dynasty Egypt. This is dynasty number 25. This when the Southerners kind of came back up, reestablished power for the Black Africans, and now we're starting to get incursions from other groups coming in, and had another 150 years of pure African dynasty reigning from Kemet. So you had Bianchi, Shabaka, Harka, all of these southern pharaohs that reigned from Egypt. Shaka, the Zulu king. I always liked that face from the movies, so I took y'all remember? Yeah. Bad man. But anyhow, basically, if you were one of the groups that Shaka overran, he may not be your favorite. However, he was able to establish a big enough territory to be reasonably protected from European incursion and all that, as they were coming in the earlier part of that century. So Shaka built power and knew what power was about. Of course, we saw the movie and how he died. There's all kinds of speculation about that, but I have him here just for the state building, nation building aspect of it, even if sometimes you take over other polities to grow yours into something that's viable. Fannie Lou Hamer, of course we had to struggle for the franchise as Africans in America, and no more than Fannie Lou Hamer is a portrait of courage. She was arrested and beaten and jailed and tortured and all the rest, but she still came back and told them she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Now here most of the children don't know that, like when I'm 63, when I was small, functionally black people couldn't vote. I mean, in Georgia, they were still doing the jelly bean test. How many jelly beans in the jar. So Because they here in Ghana just think we've had this bed of roses for all this time. I said, no, we couldn't vote. And getting ready to not be able to vote now.
Again,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so. Okay, now I'm going to, okay, tell me about Tokbe Street. You guys aren't from the Anlo side, though, right? Which is still known. Or maybe you don't. Tokbe Street, he's the leader who brought mainly the southern Voltarians, Anlos, down from a place called Norche, which is in the middle of, in the north central part of Togo, which actually comes from an area in Nigeria. So there's a long story about how. Yeah. So, but about 1600s is when he started migrating down here with this branch of the Ewe people. So he's one of their. So what I did on these, I just asked different Ewe's to give me, you know, people that they would like to, and he got the most votes as far as I could tell.
Right.
So that's why I took this. He is the most well known.
The guys that are done this all were part of that migration.
Right, they were part of it.
They settled along the way.
Along the way, and kind of, and so they're still together now. Really, a lot of the Airways and the Tangways and all of that, at least on this side. For the guys, I got Taki Kawia, who's the Gamantes Gachi to the turn of last century. Of course, he tried to maintain some kind of order and sovereignty in the face of the initial colonial onslaught. You can see his statue is still down there near Makola Market somewhere. So this is the only picture I could find of him, actually, and it was very grainy, so we did the best we could do. So that was the Airways. This is the gods. Next four in the middle are just some other favorites. What I do here a lot of times is I get one of the children in the class, and I have them go stand, and I let the children choose who looks most like this. And they'll look around, they'll choose somebody, and he'll go stand there, and we'll take a few pictures. And we'll do all of that before I say who it is. And then I tell them, well, okay, now this is Menes or Narmer. And we actually have this is the salt head that is carved, out of rock, stone. I think it's in the British Museum. So we know this is the real one. It's not some artist conception. He's the first pharaoh of the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, or ancient Kemet. So now he's so obviously African, that we can't really, it doesn't make sense to, it takes a lot of imagination to make him something else, and especially after I've had the children pick the one who looks most like him. So that I do that to just drive home the point that ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet was a black civilization from the beginning all the way till, roughly 300 BC when the Greeks came in, and even then. Okay, now this is one of my favorite revolutionaries / revolutionaries. Amakar Cabral out of Guinea-Bissau, probably more than anyone, did the most collapsed the whole Portuguese colonial system in Africa. Guinea-Bissau, they were winning so much. Imhotep, I do the same thing here. Use another student, and then I tell him Imhotep, this is the third dynasty in ancient Kemet. Imhotep is the world's first known multiple genius. So, astronomer, he's a poet, scribe, he's also the world's first known medical doctor. And that's something that even the teachers believe. Sometimes tell people that have Ghanaian doctors come to world's first medical doctor. One of them went away and did some Google Harvard and Yale and then not wanting to talk about it. So when they came and they learned and they trained in Egypt, backwards for 22 years here, so on, they did all of them in ancient Kemet. So they were proud to talk about their association, tradition of Asclepius. So anyway, I like the children to know. How y'all doing? Long wall, ain't it? Now we can break it. We can just do the fast version for the rest of it. It's up to y'all. I don't want to be responsible for no problems. Sound overture. We know the Haitian Revolution. I guess fits again. Haitian Revolution. The one good thing that the Europeans have done for us, given in their curriculum, is told us that the greatest armies that ever lived, the Roman armies, Napoleon's French army, and I can say, oh yeah, by the way, he whooped Napoleon, kicked him out. And they're like, the Napoleon? Yeah, that was, we beat him, so he's the greatest army. He lost. Nakbela, if you're coming from the northern part of Ghana, like my wife and them, Maprusi, the Gombas, Anumbas, Moshe, all of them come down to Nakbela and fly. The first is Santahini, or King of the Ashantis, and the long story that goes along with Tapanoche, who also, by the way, was an alien. It's a whole other story. And the golden stool and all of these things. But anyway, Sankara, a young revolutionary politician out of Burkina Faso, just next door. French used to call it Upper Volta, Haute Volta. They came in and changed the name to Burkina Faso, land of the upright. Moshi language, uncorruptible. And of course, the reason really they got rid of him, they always find a black man to do it rest of them, he's not paying all of this onerous debt that they have sunk on these international institutions. There's no way we're small country. If we pay it, we'll starve. If we don't pay it, you won't miss it. It's all fake anyway. He told the other leaders, he said, look, we're standing here talking about it. I'm telling you what we have to do. I'm going to do it. No one else does it. This time next year I won't be here. But that's the legacy, and I can talk more about that some other time. This is why we're doing the multi-purpose library to go into detail with the children on the weekend and any other time as well. Okay, Amenorretus of ancient Kush. Right now, in Egypt, the Roman army, Caesar and these people are taking over. Children will know about that, know about the Roman army, all the details. I tell them, the Roman army tried to go south and get Kush to take southern Egypt, northern Sudan today. And they ran into Amenorretus, which is Queen or Kandaki. We call it Candace, corrupted name, Kandaki. Ancient Kush. She was able to basically crush the Roman army, make Caesar and all these people back off, send them back, running back to Egypt. They maintained their sovereignty for another 300 something years. So I like our children to understand that we haven't always lost. The problem is, somewhere along the line, there was such a discrepancy in military technology and weaponry. That's when we started systematically losing, and that's what we do. There was no lack of courage, organization, or anything else. It just happened. Remember that, because that's about who you are. Menelik of Ethiopia, of course, he's here because the Ethiopians were never colonized. The Italians tried to do it. Menelik had the foresight to get his weaponry, his ammunition, compile everything. We've seen what had happened to the other African countries that lost these colonial wars. And the Ethiopians, Italians came down in the mix and tried to betray them with some treaty, lay down the conflict. They fought it out. Decisive battle, 1896 in Mabua, and they've always remained independent, non-colonized. Malcolm X, our black shining prince. I think you all know who he is. I'd like the children to know what really happens here is they see the X and they want to know about it. So this is what starts the conversation about our name and all of that. So same family. That's how we've got these things. And you know, the children are appalled by that. They just think that is the worst thing. What? They did what? You know, see, I think people trying to go live with. Just when another great South African shooting came coming down the line and shot up. I think this is where you really start seeing that military advantage of the British Army and their guns versus well-organized courageous Zulu warriors who won some battles, but at the end they were like the mountain I mentioned, Queen Key in the front. Those guys were wars between Rocket Mountain and like change in the not a serious super change, but change in the emphasis of their spiritual system for the sun, 10. But people who are, you ever heard of Sigmund Freud? You probably have. You know, his last book is called Moses and Monotheism. And that's where he talks about Moses being Egyptian, right? Coming out and, you know, so he's basically this Egyptian, bringing in Egyptian religion. You know, and now you've got all this other stuff about going to Mount Sinai. You know, and of course we've been talking about this for a long time, but when you go back and see him, of course, so he basically said that this religion we call Judaism and all these things, basically this. So of course what he doesn't say, nobody's black coming back there. The things created. So any of the monotheists